We're here with the wonderful Michelle L. Myers. It's morning here in Australia, but afternoon in Arizona. So welcome to Michelle.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah. And Michelle is a writer, and she is an artist. She's a musician, and she is a seer. And she is a mum of 7 beautiful children, and she is a daughter of the Most High God.
Yeah.
So, Lord, we're speaking with Michelle today about her wonderful book that she's written, which is a book called Let Us Out of the Cages, An Adult with Autism, and I'll be putting the links to that book at the end of this recording. And we're talking to Michelle also just about her experience of being a mum of 7 autistic children. And 7. And in Michelle's book, there is a wonderful quote, and it says, autism is a word representing a broad array of colourful, beautiful humans. Humans who, if you let us, will open people's eyes to the beauty and wonderment of the world, which is an amazing quote, and I think that does sum up what it is to be autistic. So, Michelle, in your words, can you describe your beautiful family to us, please?
Well, first, thank you again for allowing me to be here. I love to talk about neurodiversity. I love to talk about autism. So I'm a single mom of 7 autistic children. They are ages 25 down to 16. Someone just had a birthday, so I get confused. But I have 4 girls and 3 boys. And my mother, who is neurotypical, has pretty much always lived with me most of my life, even when I was married, for especially when the children were little. Because, autistic person, my executive functioning can be kind of off as far as scheduling and knowing task and what to do. So it was always pretty much my mom. At one point in time, it was my ex-husband, but he left about 12 years ago. So my eldest was 14. So I guess for the last 10 years, it's just been the children, my mom and myself.
Okay.
So that.
Yeah. And just reading in your book and just knowing you through interaction over the years, your children, like yourself, are very creative. So what sort of gifts and strengths and talents do your children have that you have expanded on?
Well, one of the things that I'm a person who believes that science actually proves God. And so, for instance, when people say things like you have a prophetic gifting, spiritual sight, and things like that, I also think that those things can be explained through quantum physics, as well as things like synesthesia, which means you have different senses that see or line up with different things. Scientists actually believe that there's many children or adults that have autism that actually also have what's called synesthesia. And that's whenever a part of your brain, if it's supposed to be hearing something, but instead you see a color. Yes. And you start to have these extra things that come along with one of your senses. Yeah. So I do believe in what some might define as an intuitive or sixth sense. I say is the Holy Spirit. I say is communing with God. Yeah. And all of the children, since they were really little, I've always had God since I was 4. So they grew up in a house with a mom who would, say things like, oh, the Lord told me this, or God said this to me. And my gift of prophecy was really strong since I was little. So if there was a drought and God said it's going to rain in 6 days, and everyone thought I was crazy because I'd say, God said it's going to rain in 6 days. But my children grew up in that atmosphere and saw when the Lord would use me. And so they were really open.
Yes.
We all diagnosed with autism in 2009. Yeah. So I have also been a musician and a pianist and a songwriter. I've been songwriting since I was 7 or 8, but I played the piano since I was 4. Yeah. And so children grew up in studios. They grew up hearing music all the time. So some of them actually are on the Grammy ballot for songwriting destinies. And so mixing the spiritual with the physical gifts that God gave us, my children are in this little microcosm, I'd call it, that God allowed us to be in. And he really did shield us in some ways, but then that's because I learned the hard way, a lot of the things I didn't know I was autistic.
Yes.
So my family is a bunch of singing, dancing, artistic illustrators, very right brain gifted, as well as some are highly intelligent.
Yeah, yeah. So music itself, you write about this in your book, and I found that with my own daughter Sarah, music is extremely important for for all of us, but more so it's a medium through which autistic people can really learn and thrive and function. So can you expand a little bit more on how you see music as having a really important role in the life of someone who's autistic?
Yeah. My entire life, I thought that everybody saw or heard what I heard and saw. Till, of course, you start going to school and you just get older. It's like, wow, I don't think people are seeing the world as I am.
Yeah.
And music, I didn't need body language. I didn't need, I didn't need the lyrics were just poetry to your soul, but you don't even need lyrics. That's why I love my favorite composers, Chopin and Rachmaninoff. I loved classical music because it didn't have, and you could just, I love soundtrack music. That's what I write because it's just about my feelings. Yeah. And when I feel lost in a sea of faces and not understanding colloquialisms and things that people would say, music doesn't have a language barrier. So when my children, David specifically, my son, and I had a daughter that was severely stage 3 autistic. They were not speaking. And at the piano practice one day, I noticed that whatever speed I was playing to, he would rock back and forth to. So I was like, okay, doctors are telling me he's totally unaware, at 3 years old, that he's just not connecting. And I just never believed that. Yeah. So I began to pair his movements and try to see if I could orchestrate him changing his behavior based on what tune I did. And I started working. So I implemented letters, and then I started singing only the letter A with the song, or only a word with the letter song. And I also had to do that with Sunshine. Yeah. So time went along, I found out years later that music is something that works both hemispheres of the brain. So it works the language side, it works the other side, that's feeling. And so the emotional center, the place where language is. Yes. And so you have this learning and then the emotional and the language, and it meets together from both sides of the brain. And that's why it's so instrumental. We feel lost. If we have music on, there's music on now in my house. Yes. I kept the music on. I tell parents all the time when they have a nonverbal child, it is so important. The neurotransmitters that we have that get fired off music, it's so amazing and so different. And when you have a nonverbal autistic child, you definitely can utilize music to cause it to be that awareness and understandanding.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I find that with my Sarah, she's very tuned to classical music in particular. She loves classical music, but like all sorts of music. Yeah.
It's comforting, but there's something about classical music, and I'm not quite, there's tons of theories, of course, at this point. We need to have more studies done about autism and music. Yeah. There's out there, but again, a lot of the things are also only tailored toward boys. A lot of the early forms of autism and the ones we see coming up, but I would love if they did an extensive study, including both genders as far as autism is and music.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's something that's very underrated and something that, like you say, we need more research definitely done on that.
I've told several times that my son would never ever talk. And I prayed because I didn't notice my children were different until they started going to school. And they're all right in a room, so it's not like I had time to go, oh, wait, something different about the first one. There's just, so I already had 7 kids ages 10 on down. Yeah. So when that language started being an issue, I didn't think they acted different at all. They acted like me. Yeah. So when we started going to school was when there was an issue because, of course, autism has a spectrum. So people have strengths and weaknesses all around it. Yeah. So some had things where they couldn't, mask like I did. Yeah. And I'll never forget, I couldn't understand when they kept telling me things like, this is just, it's a disease. This is how they're going to be. He's never going to talk. And I prayed and I said, I know a God that says he can do anything, first of all. Yeah. Second of all, I was as a child, I was so lost. And yet God has allowed me to be able to find my voice and find my language. And that was without a diagnosis because he's God. So I prayed a lot, and that's where the music thing, God showed me what to do with music, and also what therapies and which therapists.
Yes.
And I refuse to believe. A lot of times as believers, we want to have it that if something has to be 100% healed and look like everybody else for it to be the way God intends it for it to be.
Yeah.
Well, then I'd have to look at them and say, I read a story in the book where my son was completely nonverbal.
Yeah.
And he walked up to a man that had no legs in Walmart. Yeah. And he was 7 or 8. He put his hands on his legs and he looked him dead in the eyes and said, I love you.
Yeah.
The man started weeping, and I thought it was going to be awkward. So I was about to apologize. And the man's crying, and he hugged my son and he said, I haven't had somebody tell me they love me in over 20 years. Yeah. And then right after my son did that, he hugged the man and then went right back to gazing off to the side. And so you can't tell me God can't use somebody that has autism and isn't like everybody else, because God can use anybody who wants to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's amazing.
There's a lot of stories, you know. God, one thing someone said to me once, you know, why didn't you, if you knew something was quite wrong with one of your children, why did you stop? Why didn't you stop at like number 4? Yeah. Again, I didn't notice. No. But I talk about in the book, God came to me when I was around 10, and he said, I'll give you anything you ask me for. Yeah. And I want to write music, because I'd heard a story. I want to write music like David in the Bible. Yeah. And I want to love God. Yeah. You know, I know you love God, man. Yeah. There's just a thing where you love God. And I wanted that because I'd heard about that in Sunday school. My parents had just started going to cult church. I talk about that in the book. But I love the stories of David. And then I wanted to have as many children as he'd give me. And I have no idea why I said that. He just put that in me. And the third was to be at least a little bit smart like Solomon. And when I went to have children, one of the promises I made to God when I was 10 was I would never do anything to prevent myself from being blessed with however many he wanted. Yes. And I know that's not for everybody. That's not for everybody. Yeah. Now, it's shocking to everybody and baffling, of course, that all 7 of them are autistic. Yeah. Diagnosed. It's not like we're guessing. Yeah. Several times over diagnosed. Yeah. But God has I've seen God use my children to do things that I think neurotypical people would have thought about too much. You know how we care, the world cares so much what other people think. Yeah. I kind of have something in me that doesn't do that. Yeah. Children be so bold and do things that I don't think they would have done had they been easily influenced by peers in that way and things like that. Yeah. And, you know, what you say, you know, you talk about, and I'm putting this in inverted commas, you know, the world sees people with autistic as, you know, they're wrong in some way. They need, you know, to be different. And it's like, you know, for my own daughter, I've realised with her, like she has, you know, health challenges that, you know, we've assisted her with, you know, she's had social challenges, but the core of her identity and how God has created her is just perfect. And it's just, you know, expanding on those, you know, the strengths. Because sometimes I'll sit next to my Sarah and I'll just look at her and I'll just think, I'd love to be her for a day. I'd love to be inside her mind for a day, I should say, you know. Yeah, and that's the whole journey, you know. When autistic people don't, in my view, and I know it's yours too, they don't have to be changed to conform to this world. They have to be celebrated for who they are and the strengths and all of that brought out, you know. And I think it is very important to note, and this is controversial with some people in me, and people get angry when I say this, but it's funny, most of the people that get angry are neurotypical health professionals who they don't ask adult verbal autistic people, ask us and we will tell you how we feel, versus people always want to tell us how we feel. And I get really passionate and angry actually about it. Yeah. But yes, there are people who, this is the controversial part. There are people who are diagnosed with autism and they have anxiety and they're drooling out their mouths, they're rocking, or they might be on the floor, they scream a lot, or they have food aversions and sensory issues and lying. Also, the thing about it is there are some things that, yes, are common for someone who has autism. But the true way to diagnose autism is through diagnostic testing, not just through the symptoms you see. There are tens of sensory issues that are not autism. There's anxiety disorders. There are other things that are we call comorbidities with autism. A lot of autistic people will have other diagnoses.
Yeah.
So the problem where we're trying to speak up more is my brain and how I think is my identity.
Yes.
So if you're around talking about how you want to cure me, then what kind of self-esteem do I have when everything about me you're trying to condition and change?
Yeah.
I have photophobia. So when I go in some place and it's too bright, but that's separate from autism. That's not because I have autism.
Oh.
I have Ehlers-Danlos, which is a connective tissue disorder, and my tissues rip easily. And they're finding that a lot of people have musculoskeletal diseases or other things. The brain process, I try to get people to understand the brain process, how I see the world, that's autism.
Yeah.
Autism is not a lot of the other challenges that I have, they're diagnoses I have, because I was formed genetically in my mother's womb with something a little bit different.
Yeah.
There are now over 100 genes that are common in people with autism.
Yeah.
So the scientists want to say we're mutated, which is mutated genes, they call it, or not. I have to say, well, God sure did allow it. Yeah. So then I have to teach myself, my children, and other autistic people about a sense of self-awareness, that you're not ashamed of who you are and how you see the world. Yes. But we do need support. We do need more testing. We do need more support for parents, especially neurotypical parents, because they don't understand that difference. And so they're saying to their child, what I hear when you tell me, oh, I need to care, or you need to be more, or you take things from me and condition me, you punish me to act more neurotypical. Yeah. Many adults reach out to me that have post-traumatic stress disorder from therapy, from autistic therapy, from ABA therapy, applied behavioral therapy. You need to check out these practitioners. Yeah. And so I'm passionate about it because I don't want my children to go through what I did. I don't want other families to, because I'm autistic, I don't care. So I will boldly do whatever. But I know a lot of neurotypical parents don't have that. And so we want to help in all. I think God wants us to speak up about it. He doesn't want families to be stressed out and thinking that, like I was told, your child's never going to talk. He's never going to be independent. My son graduated with a 3.8 grade average from regular school classes, although he had an IEP. And then he got accepted into one of the most prestigious art campuses for illustration. And he was the one they said would never talk again. He would never do anything. And God has the final word. So when I prayed, I saw when Jeremiah, God says, I have plans. So I refuse to believe the doctors saying, oh, your son is just going to whatever. God has plans for autistic people too.
Yeah. And, you know, God spoke to me about my Sarah one day when I was, you know, crying and, you know, about what I was going to do. We were going through a hard time. But he said to me, and I'll never forget it, as much as you love her, I love her more. I have a plan for her life and I will be glorified. And that has sustained me.
Yeah.
I love her more. And he does. He loves Sarah way more than I could ever imagine or hope for, you know, so that's the thing.
Yes. Daughter of God, princess, isn't Sarah? Yeah, Sarah.
That's it, Sarah, yeah. Princess Sarah, like your Sarah. Yeah, princess.
You know, it meant so much to me just now when you actually said, you look at her sometimes and you wonder, what would it be like to be in her world? And I tell people all the time, there's something called reciprocal play, which is really the best therapy that I recommend. Yeah. And it's not where you're punishing a child to try to get them to behave. You invite them into the activity you're doing. And even for 50 times they don't want to do it and they sit there, but you invite them into your world. Because I think often if people could see my house is nothing like people think. When people come over, they usually like, I have people cry. They have been like, your house is not like I thought. I thought it would be a bunch of, you know, weird autistic children. There's so much peace in my house because we don't have a need to, sometimes we don't even talk. There'll be music on. And although my children are 25 down to 16, we all will be in the same room together. Someone's knitting, someone's playing the guitar, and there's peace. We don't need flashy lights. We don't need conversation even. Yeah. I just wish that there was a way. Neurodiversity includes neurotypical people.
Yeah.
But for right now, we have to say neurodiverse to, denote ADHD, autism, which a lot of people still don't understand. You can have autism and, like me, have ADHD and autism.
Yeah.
And some people think they get put on medications and they're just, especially women. And they're written off as all these emotional, hormonal things, and they don't get the proper testing. Yeah. And that is the main thing I'm pushing for, is there must be the availability of more testing. And then if we identify in the school system a child that has autism, we automatically go and figure out if the parents do. Because if you help the best way to help that child is to support the parent, whether they're neurodiverse or neurotypical. Yeah. But if we can support families, I think God wants us to. That's why I put in the book, there's a time when this man had prayed for me and something did change. I don't know. It was like all of a sudden I was more aware of gravity and the colors looked a little bit different. Yeah. And everyone was like, you're healed of autism. And I thought, great, I will make everybody happy now. Because at that time it was, 2009, everyone just talked about it was a disease. There wasn't gene studies out yet. So I also believed, oh my goodness, it must be from these immunizations. It's from all this stuff we had. Lord Jesus, heal us. And God came to me and I tried to pray about it and he laughed. And I was like, why in the world would God laugh about me praying about disease? And then as time went on, God told me to start researching. He kept telling me it's not what you think it is. Yeah. And so I kept going forward. But on that day in 2009, I think it was 2010, I was like, yeah, the next day I woke up, I still thought the same exact way, but there was something different. Yeah. I think something was healed. But you know what? I still write a symphony in a week. I still can write a novel in a day. I still, when people are talking, I see letters. I still, I still can't put juice up, or I get panicky. My mom still orchestrates my day sometimes. I'm still autistic. Yeah. So like, God left me this way. What did he do? Only heal a piece of me and then left the rest. I don't know. So I understand what I'm saying. There's a lot of miseducation out there, especially in the faith community. And we have a lot of people, yes, changing your diet matters. You know why? I believe, and there's scientific evidence out there, people that have autism, the lining of their intestines is more permeable. So when you eat toxins or stuff you shouldn't, even if the mom in utero does, she helps form all that stuff. Well, yeah, that can influence it. But the reason influencing it is because it was already autistic. It was already having a genetic anomaly was already going on. So that's why when people remove gluten and sugars and all these things, they go, oh, my child is cured. I guarantee you they're cured of symptoms that had nothing to do with the way that they process through their brain. And that's the main message I hope people to get. It's about how we see the world. It's not just about how I rock back and forth or I stim with my hands when I get really nervous. No, it's about how I see the world. Yeah. I love humanity. People with autism, we always are drawn to something, animals or nature, or we want to create peace and harmony. I don't know any autistic person of all my friends and all people I've ever worked with that have this horrible intent or greed or things like that don't even make sense to me. And it's heartbreaking because I can't even comprehend a lot of the stuff I see in the world. Yeah. And I'm in full agreement with that. It's just like, how do you reconcile what's happening? I don't know. We have to be careful. Like, I'm a person who's big on meditating as well as praying. And I know there's lots of believers who be like, oh, meditation. No, listen, God says to meditate is actually one of the words in the Bible. And what that's about is that same thing when he says to capture your thoughts. Yeah. And so when we do not watch the news in this house, we would be devastated on the floor crying with Bibles or something all the time. Yeah. Because we literally don't even have a thing that I can't even comprehend. It's just not doable. So what we try to do is God always says, whatever gifts I've put inside of you, that was what I want you to gift everyone that you come in contact with. Mine happens to be one of love and positivity. I have a daughter that thinks peace everywhere she goes. I have a son that's just laughter. And so we try to, instead of, like Peter, at least he got out the boat, but everyone wants to focus on how he looked and he started sinking.
Yeah.
And God doesn't want us to sink. So he's like, keep your eyes on me. And for what I teach autistic people is when the world's telling you how much you need to change,
Yeah.
what did God put in you? What's the thing that you're passionate about? I know you're Sarah. Isn't she into drawing?
Yeah, I know she's very much into, her thing is about people and being around people and picking up what they're going through and then applying comfort or in turn back to them.
No.
Angry or upset, it's like, well, come on, what's going on? That's her real thing.
And a lot of times I see where people of faith, when something's not exactly like, or if we listen to health professionals, and if it doesn't line up exactly with what we consider to be healthy, perfect, and whatever, it's kind of like I've never one time been to a church where someone saw someone with Down syndrome and said, hey, let's pray that all for them. Yet I see people all the time, if I say I'm autistic, they say, oh, we're praying for you for that. God can take that from you.
Yeah.
And I'm asking, what's the disconnect there? Because you can't see how my brain processes, but you would never walk up to a child that had Down syndrome and say, oh, you need to be more like children who don't have Down syndrome in order for God to say you're healed.
Exactly.
You know what that means? It's hurtful. We talked about just, you feel like no one truly understands that everything that you do is because it's like God put this beacon inside of autistic people.
Yeah.
Where they want to make whatever is around them, they want everybody to be all right. Yeah. They want hurt to stop. They want pain to end.
Yes.
So I know there's some people who are completely nonverbal, some older children still wearing diapers. I do acknowledge and understand, but I also try to put it to parents that is something else attached to autism. That doesn't just make a person autistic. Yes. And unfortunately, what I think happens is we're not treating the other diagnoses because we don't give them one. We just say, oh, that's autistic, when the child might actually have a sensory issue that we can deal with, a photophobia like me, and other things. And then we just call it autistic. And there's a lot of people that had no idea I was autistic. I didn't know how to feel about that. It wasn't that I was hiding it. And then last year, I went someplace and God said, I want you to tell them you're a seer and you're autistic. And I was like, what in the world? No. I was like, why would you want me to? Okay, the two weirdest things about me, according to society. But I learned it was because he wanted me to start speaking up about it. Yeah. We have to change the narrative, especially in circles of faith. Yeah. People have to stop looking at autistic people. God uses me. I don't see on my own. I'm not as prophetic as I am on my own. None of this is attributed to me. To be honest, I'm extremely introverted and I would stay in my house all day long. I have to be careful not to do that. Yeah. So God is the one that gives, and he formed you in your mother's womb. And when autistic people go into a place and everyone's different, if you can imagine, it's already overwhelming when you know you're different. Yeah. Then when people, especially of faith, put it off on you as if like the devil has, ruined your life and, God wants you to be healed. Well, so what if I'm never healed? What if I'm never neurotypical? Yeah. Are we going to teach children and people that God can't use you because you see differently? Yeah. And it's heartbreaking that I have parents reach out to me and say, I really thought that God blessed us. I had a parent right in front of me in a church. She was an autistic child. And I asked her, would she have any more children? And she's a person that's on staff. This a person who's been saved a while. And she literally said, I got my tubes tied because God forbid I have another autistic child. And her child, beautiful. I'll never forget that day because the child would always come to my house and say, I love being at your house because everybody knows me there. Like that was the way they were expressing. I'm using they on purpose, not to identify the gender. And it was just heartbreaking because his parents both then laughed about it and were like, oh, I know, and rolling their eyes. And this child was just an 8-9-year-old. And so talented and so smart. But because the child ran around a lot and made a bunch of noise, and the mom was just, and then she would compare it to the neurotypical child. And I sometimes would sit when I worked with them crying after they'd leave, because I don't understand how, as children, especially when we acknowledge the creator and God, we sit up and when things aren't the way we think they should be. And this boy was prophetic. I said boy now. He is just this beautiful light. And it just hurt my soul that that's how his parents treat him.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
they're sorry and they wished he was normal. We have to stop that. We have to stop.
That's it. That's it. And like you say, like all of those other things, like, you know, the digestive issues or the sensory issues, they're apart from the autism. But the autistic person, that is how God is created. And that is a strength, you know, and to bring those strengths out, you know. So I could talk to you forever, Michelle. It's just amazing. But I just have one more question. And before I ask it, I just want to say to the people listening, Michelle writes in her book about so many things like masking and the importance of having a routine and the sleep cycle, and so many issues which autistic people, you know, face one or more of those issues. So I do encourage everyone to check Michelle's book out, because it's fantastic. But the last question I wanted to ask you, Michelle, was, and I know your children have been homeschooled for many years, but if you were in charge of designing a school curriculum in a school for people with autism, how would you design it?
Wow. You know, my children and I talk a lot about, we wish, now it's sort of like segregation a little. So, you know, being minorities, we're careful, but sometimes it's so hard. I don't think people understand how hard it can be in a quote, what we call neurotypical dominated world. And we sometimes say it would be so neat to live in a village where everybody was just autistic and we all just did our jobs and we all just loved each other and nature and animals. And school, it would be such a, I've thought about this.
Yeah.
More like a Montessori type school where children aren't just learning sitting with books.
Yeah.
But they're learning like the old way you used to. You learn by doing, with a person showing you how to, from grow a plant to your letters being done outside to learning how to spell the word water while touching the water. I teach a little thing. I don't think I included it all the way in the book, but I call it autistic numbers. Whenever there's an autistic person going through a behavior that you're like, this is imbalanced, and that's what we say. We don't say right or wrong. God told me to say, I want you to say balanced for a person or imbalanced. Yeah. If you can utilize 3 sentences at once, you will be able to distract the autistic person from the behavior. So, for instance, we learn visually, audibly, and smell, and says we need it all in order to capture our attention sometimes. Yes. So I tell parents, if I were teaching school, when I teach you how to spell water, I would have you hear water on the loudspeaker. I would have you touch water, and I would show you the word water.
Yes.
I think that not only would help autistic children, that would help other children, yes, but we can also see the strengths and weaknesses of the senses. Yeah. I think the key is the senses. I would have lower lighting. I wouldn't have all these electric things. Oh, we hear everything, some of us.
Yes.
Everything. Yes. So I would have soundproof rooms. I would have, it makes no sense, but if you leave classical music on low, yes, we automatically have to calm down. I don't know why that works. It's worked for hundreds of people I've suggested it to, and my own children and myself. Yeah. But if you have it on low, it's like white noise for autistic people. Yeah. But I would have it be a place where there was self-expression, and that thing that kid rocking back and forth, well, let's give him a drum. Let's give him a music instrument. He's got rhythm. And that girl that won't sit still, okay, what can she possibly be good at? And she keeps messing up or breaking pencils. Well, let's give her something to build. You know, maybe she's an engineer. And I don't agree that we're some new species. There's some autistic people that think, you know, we're some new. No, I think there's a mutated gene. God allowed it. But if you would let autistic people access their strengths at a young age and push them that direction, I think we could redesign schooling for sure. Yeah. So I would definitely have a place that was sensory aware, but also just celebrated who that child is, and help people learn how to invite autistic people into their awareness.
Yeah. Well, it's been amazing talking to you, Michelle.
I'm glad I got to